for this, and I am going to do a very short presentation that relates to our botanical garden here in Palestine. As mentioned, I'm Mazin Qumsiyeh. I'm professor at Bethlehem University. Before that, I was in the US, came back to Palestine in 2008, where we started this botanic garden and institute in 2014. I actually have visited Oxford in 2017 before this COVID-19, and I visited the botanic garden and other areas there. And it was an honor, and I hope to visit again. I'm speaking to you from Palestine. Palestine, of course, is an important area in the world. It is a bottleneck of migrations of both humans and other species. Humans, for example, migrated out of Africa through Palestine to Eurasia and from then on to the Americas. Birds still migrate back and forth between Eurasia and Africa every year in spring and winter and fall migrations. Some estimate of 500 million birds pass through Palestine on these migrations. The geography and geology of Palestine were such that it has fertile soil, and it's part of what's called the Fertile Crescent, where humans first developed agriculture, cultivating wheat, barley, lentils, chickpeas, and so on. Jericho, for example, is the oldest continuously inhabited town on earth. This rich nature that allowed domestication of wild plants and animals is also why Palestine is part of the Mediterranean hotspot for conservation, a very important area globally. The reason for this is geographically and geologically, Palestine, as I mentioned, geographically is located at the intersection of continents. Geologically, it has the lowest point on Earth, being the Dead Sea, on the map on the right, if you want. But it also has high mountains like Jebel Sheikh, Mount Hermon in the north. It has 4 or 5 biogeographical zones or phytogeographical regions. In the West Bank alone, this West Bank is the area that's kidney-shaped that was occupied by Israel in 1967, together with the Gaza Strip and other areas. This area includes 4 phytogeographical zones, and you could actually walk from where I am in Bethlehem to the Dead Sea, and a distance of about 30 kilometers. And in this distance, you can pass through 4 biogeographical zones. The habitat is so rich that we have a lot of wildlife. We have very rich biodiversity for our latitude. We have more plants actually than there exists in countries many times bigger, like England. But this biodiversity is threatened by many factors. I don't have too much time to go through the details of this, but I'll mention a couple of threats. For example, the mega projects like the diversion of the water of the Jordan Valley from Lake Tiberias to the west that dried up the Jordan Valley, like the drying up of the wetland and the area of the Lake of Hula that resulted in the loss of 219 species, and most recently a project that entails building a canal between the Red Sea and the Dead Sea to replenish the loss in the Dead Sea water level that's caused by the diversion of the water from the Jordan Valley. Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza, as I mentioned, in 1967. But before that, in 1948, there was large ethnic cleansing of some 530 Palestinian villages and towns, including destruction of all the diverse agricultural areas around them. including wild trees, by the way, and planting deciduous, planting pine trees in place of these villages. The villages that were destroyed are shown in the red spots on the map on the right. And then when Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza, they proceeded to build settlements. The picture on the left shows the Israeli settlements in blue that are in the middle of Bethlehem, around Bethlehem, where I am now. This also includes industrial settlements that dump toxic waste that damage the environment, damage biodiversity. And of course, uprooting trees, destroying trees, and so forth is common practice. Over 2 million trees, for example, were destroyed to build the wall, the apartheid wall that Israel has built. Israel is not the only, of course, cause of environmental damage. Palestinian damage, including from urban sprawl, and this picture is from a valley near here that's very rich in biodiversity, which shows what's called the development. It's really a small farm that has expanded to destroy the habitat and not in a friendly way to the environment. Okay, as I mentioned, I don't want to talk too much about the symptoms of biodiversity loss. I want to talk about the botanic garden here and what we are doing. What we are doing at the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability is to try and counter this by actions that relate to sustainability. And that involves research, education, and conservation. On the research front, we publish about 2 papers a month in various areas, including on plants, of course, and these are just some of our recent relevant papers from the past few months on issues like orchids and rare plants and other things in Palestine. You can get these papers from our website, palestinenature.org. Our research and our education and our conservation follow the Sustainable Development Goals that were instituted by the UN. We live in the West Bank, as I mentioned, near Bethlehem, and our institute is in Bethlehem. Our institute is, and the area of Bethlehem is part of these areas and corridors that are important and crucial to biodiversity conservation. We have key biodiversity areas indicated on the right side, and we belong to Al-Quds, or Jerusalem Biodiversity Area. This Jerusalem Biodiversity Area, like other areas in Palestine, has few green areas left because of the expansion of both Palestinian population and also the Israeli settlements that are built on Palestinian lands in the West Bank. So on the right it shows the green areas per district in the West Bank and Gaza, which are proposed to be a future Palestinian state. Nature reserve areas shown on the left are numerous. They fall mostly on the eastern regions towards the Jordan Valley and those Irano-Turanian and Sahara-Arabian and Ethiopian penetration zones, but also on the western areas of the hills, which are mostly Mediterranean coastal, Mediterranean and coastal areas. If I take the example of Bethlehem here, where I am, is in Bethlehem on the right side, basically. There's an area that's a World Heritage Site that's also a very biodiversity-rich area called Wadi Makhrur, Wadi Hussein. These wadis, these valleys, are near villages that are marginalized, like Al-Walija, Batir, and Hussein. and that are surrounded by Israeli settlements, shown in blue here. And we worked in this area to try and conserve nature and relate it to what we are doing in the Botanic Garden. In other words, our Botanic Garden is not isolated from the other areas. Our garden acts as both in situ and ex situ conservation to nearby areas that are threatened and other areas. The garden itself, this is a drone image of it, is shown here. Has some areas that were conserved. We studied it actually for 2 seasons, 2 years before we built any additional structures on site, including greenhouses, for example, on the lower part or the south part. We put solar panels, of course, and we managed to do some things in some areas that are creating a botanic garden, but we also wanted to preserve the wild plants and animals that are in the area. So it's a mini reserve, especially the western part of it is left intact. There are over 380 species of plants that we've recorded in the garden, including about 50 rare species of plants. So when we planned the pathways, for example, the walking pathways, you can see we avoided those areas with rich plant biodiversity. Now, Palestine it's important to realize that in Palestine, agriculture and biodiversity coexisted for millennia, for thousands of years, from the first agricultural interventions that were done 11,500 years ago. So we do not discourage agriculture. We encourage agriculture that's more friendly to the environment. And we worked with farmers to show them eco-friendly agriculture that their ancestors have developed and have used, including agrobiodiversity and protection of seed crop, types of seed, gene diversity, etc. This is one of our employees who's with one of the lady farmers in her field. We also have within the Botanic Garden an area called the Community Garden, which is an area for children and others to come and grow their own vegetables in harmony with nature without using any pesticides or insecticides or anything like that. This is important for food sovereignty. We also have aquaculture, aquaponics, that are very important for food sovereignty for native people. Our botanic garden also has a herbarium associated with it, where we collect plants and study them and do research on them and so forth. We harvest rainwater. We have solar power, etc. You know, the typical things you expect from trying to mitigate and adapt to climate change in our region. On the education front, we work mostly with children and university students to encourage a spirit of innovation, exploration, critical thinking, protection of the environment, etc. We have a small playground area in the corner of the garden, and this area is enjoyed by children. Educational units that we do or work with children on these to create educational modules, like on eagle owls or other issues, including issues like recycling plastics and paper, and as I mentioned, the exploration of plants and animals of the garden. We have also connected to the Botanic Garden an ethnography museum, which as a part of it talks about ethnobotany, of course, and use of all the agricultural instruments, how our ancestors lived and farmed the land without harming biodiversity. This is part of our Museum of Natural History. You see pictures at the bottom from the Museum of Natural History. We do also go on field trips to study nature with our students, university students and others. And we have molecular labs associated with the Botanic Garden. We're now working with the Royal Society and the Natural History Museum in London on molecular sequencing, etc., which includes environmental DNA used for measuring changes in the environment. We have a group called Palestine Action for the Planet that works on conservation. We work on conservation on many, many levels. Our partnerships are numerous, from the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, the British Council, which funded our ethnobotany and ethnobiology kind of studies, Darwin Initiative, which supported our work for ex situ and in situ conservation in Wadi Al Makhrur, and the National Geographic Society, as I mentioned, the Royal Society, and the state of Palestine is state in the making. We have, it's not really independent, so they do have limited authority. They cannot control access to natural reserve or anything like that. So we try to work around the challenges of the Israeli occupation. But the state of Palestine actually selected us, thanks to our work in the Botanic Garden and our Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability. The state of Palestine selected us to do the 6th national report and to put together the national biodiversity strategy and action plan at the state level. And so we're working on this now. We could use support in this. We could use your support. If any of you would like to work with us, we welcome collaborations, of course, research, in areas of research, in areas of education, in areas of conservation. If you would like to come and visit us, you would be welcome. We have room and board for visitors and volunteers, so you would be welcome to come here and work with us. Our website is palestinenature.org, and the email is info@palestinenature.org. And so please contact us. And we have to think, of course, globally and act locally, but we are in this all together with the climate change, as you know, and the environmental catastrophes that we are facing. We must work together, really, global south and north, and everybody must work together. So we would love to reach out. We would love to collaborate. As I mentioned, I visited your area in Oxford, but I also would love to come back again and do some more serious collaborations. Thank you very much for your attention.